The stars looked different when you knew they were dying. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Harmony, watching another dead solar system drift past their viewports. 3 planets that once held billions of lives now floated as chunks of broken rock. The war had been going on for so long that entire generations had been born and died knowing nothing but conflict. Jake ran his hand through his graying hair. He had been a Marine once, back when Earth still thought it was alone in the universe. Now he wore the blue uniform of the diplomatic corps, though some days he wondered if talking was any more effective than shooting. At least when he carried a rifle, the enemy was clear. In diplomacy, sometimes your worst enemy was sitting at your own table. The communication officer looked up from her console. "Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission. It's coming from the Galactic Council." Jake frowned. The Council rarely contacted human ships directly. Earth was still considered a minor player in galactic politics. Humanity had only made contact with alien civilizations 50 years ago, and most species still saw them as newcomers who should stay quiet and learn their place. "Put it through to my ready room," Jake said. He walked to the small office behind the bridge, where he could speak privately. The holographic display flickered to life, showing 5 different alien faces arranged in a circle. Jake recognized them immediately. These were the leaders of the 5 major powers that had been fighting the longest war in galactic history. The first to speak was a creature that looked like a cross between a lizard and a warrior. Its scales were marked with battle scars, and its yellow eyes burned with ancient anger. This was General Vextar of the Kraxi Empire, a being whose name was whispered in fear across 100 worlds. "Human Morrison," Vextar growled in accented English. "We require your assistance." Jake tried not to show his surprise. The Kraxi asking for human help was like a lion asking a mouse for hunting advice. "What kind of assistance, General?" "Ew." Second alien spoke. This one appeared to be made of flowing light, constantly shifting and changing. The queen voice of the Zelthari collective rarely spoke to individual minds, preferring to communicate with entire populations at once. "Your species has shown an unusual ability to resolve conflicts without total destruction. We have observed your historical records." A third creature joined the conversation. The Vorthak looked like a walking computer, with mechanical parts visible beneath translucent skin. Sensors and data ports covered its head where hair might grow on a human. Statistical analysis indicates human diplomatic methods achieve resolution rates 37% higher than galactic standards, it stated in a flat electronic voice. The fourth being seemed to shimmer in and out of existence, as if it was only partly present in normal space. The Etherian Elder's form was mostly energy, held together by will and cosmic force. "The threads of fate converge upon your species, Captain Morrison. We have seen visions of possible futures." The last speaker was the most normal-looking of the group, though that wasn't saying much. The Quillan trade prince resembled a tall, thin human covered in golden fur, with 4 arms and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. "Let us be direct, Captain. This war is becoming expensive, very expensive. We need it to end, but none of us can appear weak by proposing peace first." Jake leaned back in his chair. "So you want humans to mediate a peace summit?" "Not mediate," Vextar corrected. "We want you to end this war permanently." The magnitude of what they were asking hit Jake like a physical blow. These 5 civilizations had been fighting for 3 centuries. They had destroyed entire star systems, killed trillions of beings, and turned vast regions of space into graveyards. Their conflict was so old that some species had evolved during its duration. "Why us?" Jake asked. "There are older, wiser species in the galaxy. The Mentari Collective has been mediating disputes for thousands of years. The Mentari think in terms of traditional solutions," the Queen voice replied. "Territory exchanges, tribute payments, subjugation protocols. We have tried all of these. They do not work for this conflict." The Vorthak's mechanical voice added more data. "Human conflict resolution methods are statistically anomalous. Your species achieves peace through psychological manipulation techniques unknown to galactic civilization. We call it understanding. Jake said quietly. The Etherian Elder's form solidified slightly. Understanding, yes. This is what the visions show. Humans see truth that others miss. You will come to Nexus Prime in 14 standard days. We will provide safe passage for your delegation. How many people can I bring? Jake asked. Bring whoever you think necessary, the trade prince said. But remember, Captain, this is not a military mission. If violence breaks out, your small, human fleet will not survive. This must be solved with words or not at all. The transmission ended, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. He stared out at the dead stars and wondered what he was getting his species into. Earth's entire military could not defeat any one of these alien civilizations in open war, let alone all five together. If he failed, if violence erupted at the summit, humanity might find itself facing extinction. But if he succeeded, if somehow they could end a 300-year war, humanity would earn a place at the galactic table that could never be taken away. Jake activated the ship's communication system. Dr. Harper, Commander Chen, and Specialist Santos, please report to my ready room immediately. Dr. Lisa Harper arrived first. She was a xenopsychologist who had spent 20 years studying alien behavior and culture. Her work had helped establish peaceful relations with 6 different species, though none as dangerous as the ones they were about to face. Commander Alex Chen came next. The strategic analyst had a mind like a computer, capable of seeing patterns and connections that others missed. If anyone could find weaknesses in the alien positions, it would be him. Maria Santos entered last. The linguistics expert spoke 17 alien languages and had been working on a universal translation protocol that could bridge communication gaps between any species. Her work might be crucial if negotiations became complex. Jake explained the situation to his team. When he finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. 300 years of war, Lisa said slowly. The psychological trauma alone must be staggering. Entire civilizations that have known nothing but conflict. The economic drain would be enormous, Alex added. They must be desperate to maintain their war efforts. That gives us leverage. Maria looked thoughtful. The real question is whether they actually want peace or just victory. If they're looking for us to help them win, we're walking into a trap. Jake nodded. That's what we need to find out. We have 2 weeks to prepare. I want full psychological profiles on all the leaders, complete strategic analysis of the conflict, and linguistic preparation for complex negotiations. As his team left to begin their preparations, Jake remained alone with his thoughts. Outside the viewports, the dead stars continued their silent journey through space, monuments to the cost of eternal war. In 14 days, humanity would either help birth a new age of galactic peace or witness the beginning of its own destruction. The stakes could not be higher, and the odds could not be worse. But sometimes, Jake reflected, the impossible was exactly what humans did best. Nexus Prime was the most beautiful planet Jake had ever seen, which made the hatred filling its crystal halls even more disturbing. The neutral world had been chosen specifically because none of the warring factions could claim it. Ancient towers of living crystal grew from the surface like frozen lightning, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with peaceful energy. The Peace Summit was being held in the Grand Assembly, a massive dome made from transparent crystal that offered a view of the planet's 3 moons. Under normal circumstances, it would have been breathtaking. Today, it felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Jake walked into the main hall with his small human delegation behind him. The contrast was overwhelming. Each alien faction had brought hundreds of representatives, advisors, guards, and support staff. The Craxi delegation looked like an army, with General Vextar surrounded by warriors in ceremonial battle armor. The Zeltari had brought dozens of queen voices, each one representing millions of collective minds. The Vorthak arrived with mobile computers and data processing units that hummed with electronic activity. The Etherian delegation seemed to float rather than walk, their energy forms casting strange shadows. The Quillen Trade Union had brought so many accountants and economic advisors that they needed their own section of the hall. In comparison, the 4 humans looked insignificant. Jake wore his simple blue diplomatic uniform, while Lisa, Alex, and Maria dressed in civilian clothes. They carried no weapons, brought no guards, and had no impressive technology on display. The opening ceremony was a disaster. Each faction took turns listing their grievances against the others, and the list was 3 centuries long. The Craxi spoke of honor lost and warriors fallen. The Zelthari mourned collective minds torn apart by war. The Vorthak calculated the economic damage in precise numbers. The Etherians spoke of cosmic balance destroyed. The Quillans listed their financial losses down to the last credit. Jake listened to 6 hours of accusations, counter-accusations, and demands for impossible reparations. By the time they broke for the evening meal, nothing had been accomplished except making everyone angrier than when they started. This is how galactic diplomacy usually works, Maria whispered to Jake as they walked to their assigned quarters. Everyone talks, nobody listens, and eventually someone starts shooting. That night, Jake called a meeting with his team in their small human section of the guest quarters. Impressions? He asked. Lisa pulled out her data pad filled with notes about alien behavior patterns. They're all afraid, she said. Every single one of them. The Craxi are afraid of looking weak because their entire culture is built on strength. The Zelthari are afraid of losing more collective minds because that's their form of death. The Vorthak are afraid their calculations are wrong because logic is their religion. The Etherians are afraid the future they see is unchangeable. The Quillans are afraid of losing more money than they can afford. Alex nodded. The strategic analysis supports that. None of them are fighting from positions of strength anymore. The Craxi have lost 60% of their military. The Zelthari collective has been fractured in 12 sectors. The Vorthak economy is failing from war production costs. The Etherians have used so much energy in battle that some of their elder forms are fading. The Quillans are nearly bankrupt. But they keep fighting, Jake said, because they don't know how to stop, Maria added. In their languages, the words for peace and defeat have become almost identical. To suggest ending the war is to suggest surrender. Jake walked to the crystal window and looked out at Nexus Prime's peaceful landscape. So we need to show them that peace isn't defeat. It's victory over the war itself. The second day of negotiations began with more of the same. Each faction presented their minimum demands for peace, and those demands were impossible to meet. The Craxi wanted public acknowledgement of their military superiority. The Zelthari demanded the return of all collective minds taken prisoner. The Vorthak required technological reparations. The Etherians insisted on spiritual compensation. The Quillans wanted financial payments that would bankrupt the other factions. Jake watched and listened, but he also observed. He noticed how General Vextar's scarred hands shook slightly when he spoke of fallen warriors. He saw the Queen Voice's light dim whenever prisoner exchanges were mentioned. He watched the Vorthak delegation run the same calculations repeatedly, as if hoping for different results. He observed how the Etherian elders' form became more solid when discussing the future, as if trying to anchor hope in reality. He noted how the trade prince's forearms moved in nervous patterns when the financial costs were discussed. During a break in formal negotiations, Jake did something unprecedented. He walked over to General Vextar's section and sat down next to the Craxi leader. "General," Jake said quietly, "can I ask you a personal question?" Vextar's yellow eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Speak, human. What was the first battle you ever lost?" The question seemed to catch the general off guard. His scarred face showed confusion, then something that might have been pain. "I have never lost a battle." "I don't mean militarily," Jake said. "I mean personally. What was the first time war took something from you that you couldn't get back?" Vextar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than Jake had ever heard it. "My clutch brother, Kexvar. We fought together in the defense of Sorrow's Edge. He died saving my life from a Zelthari mind weapon. I have won every battle since then, but I have never stopped losing him." Jake nodded. "I lost my brother too. Not in this war, but in a conflict on Earth. I became a diplomat because I realized that winning battles doesn't bring back the dead, but ending wars might prevent more deaths." For the first time since Jake had met him, General Vextar looked uncertain. You think this war can truly end? I think it has to, Jake said, because the alternative is that more Clutch brothers die for reasons that stopped making sense generations ago. Jake had similar conversations with each faction leader. He learned that the Queen voice had once been an individual mind before, joining the collective, and still mourned the loss of personal dreams. The Vorthak High Technician had calculated that continued war would lead to the extinction of all 5 species within 2 centuries, but couldn't share this data because it would cause panic. The Etherian Elder had foreseen multiple possible futures, but the only ones without war required sacrifices that seemed impossible to ask. The Trade Prince had lost 3 of his own offspring to the conflict, but couldn't admit this because it would show emotional weakness. By the 3rd day, Jake was ready to try something different. During the morning session, he stood up and asked for permission to speak. I have a question for everyone, he said. What would victory actually look like? The hall fell silent. The question seemed simple, but as the minutes passed, Jake realized that none of the faction leaders could answer it. Finally, General Vextar spoke. Victory would mean the end of our enemies. And then what? Jake asked. What would the Craxi Empire do with a galaxy at peace? The general opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. He had spent so many years fighting that he had forgotten what came after victory. The Queen voice tried next. Victory would mean the collective could expand without interference. To do what? Jake asked. What would a galaxy-spanning collective accomplish? Again, silence. The Zelthari had become so focused on survival that they had lost sight of their original purpose. One by one, Jake asked each faction the same question, and one by one, they realized they had no answer. Victory had become an abstract concept, a goal without meaning beyond the absence of defeat. Maybe, Jake said quietly. The real victory isn't defeating each other. Maybe it's defeating the war itself. For the first time in 3 days, the hall was completely quiet. In that silence, Jake could almost hear the sound of ancient hatreds beginning to crack. The 4th day of the summit began differently. Instead of sitting in their separate faction areas, Jake had convinced each group to form a mixed circle. Craxi warriors sat next to Zelthari Queen voices. Vorthak technicians shared space with. Etherian elders and Quillan traders found themselves beside beings they had considered enemies for centuries. Jake stood in the center of the circle, looking at faces that showed curiosity mixed with suspicion. Yesterday, we discovered that none of us can define victory anymore. Today, I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about what each of you values most, and how this war is destroying exactly those things. He turned to General Vextar. First, General, the Craxi value honor above all else. Tell me about Craxi honor. Vextar straightened in his seat, pride evident in his bearing. Honor is the measure of a warrior's worth. It comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves, from facing death without fear, from keeping one's word regardless of cost. Jake nodded. That's beautiful. Now tell me, what honor is there in killing civilians from orbit? What courage does it take to destroy refugee ships? What oath are you keeping when you fight beings who were never your true enemies? The general's scarred face flushed darker. We fight to protect our people from destruction. By destroying others first? Jake asked gently. General, I served in Earth's military. I know about honor in battle. Real honor isn't about being the strongest or the most feared. It's about being strong enough to protect the weak even when the weak are your former enemies. Jake pulled up a holographic display showing historical records from Earth. This is Staff Sergeant Ryan Cooper of the Earth Marine Corps. During our second global war, he was captured by enemy forces. He escaped, but instead of fleeing to safety, he went back to rescue enemy soldiers who were wounded and couldn't escape a collapsing building. He saved 17 men who had been trying to kill him just hours before. The general stared at the image. This human chose to save his enemies? Because saving them was more honorable than leaving them to die, Jake replied. He found his greatest victory in choosing mercy over revenge. The warriors he saved later became allies. Their children grew up in peace. That's what honor really looks like, General. not the strength to destroy, but the courage to choose not to. Vexitar was quiet for a long moment. This human warrior, he was truly strong. Jake turned to the Queen voice next. The Zelthari value unity, the power of many minds working as one. But tell me, how unified can you be when you're constantly at war? The Queen voice's light flickered with uncertainty. The collective must remain unified against external threats. Division would mean weakness. Dr. Lisa Harper stepped forward. Your Majesty, may I show you something about human unity? She activated her own display, showing images of Earth's democratic processes. Humans have 7 billion individual minds, each with different opinions, beliefs, and desires. We argue constantly. We disagree on almost everything. Yet somehow, we work together. How is this possible? The Queen voice asked. Chaos of thought should lead to chaos of action. Because disagreement makes us stronger, Lisa explained. When humans face a problem, we get dozens of different solutions from different minds. We debate, we argue, we test ideas against each other. The best solutions survive and everyone benefits. Unity doesn't mean everyone thinks the same thing. It means everyone works toward the same goals while bringing their unique perspectives to the table. She showed images of human scientific collaboration, artistic cooperation, and disaster relief efforts. Look at this. When earthquakes struck Japan, humans from every continent sent aid. When disease threatened Africa, researchers from enemy nations worked together to find cures. When our climate changed, nations that had been at war cooperated to find solutions. The Queen voice's light grew brighter. Individual minds working together while remaining individual. Your collective could be stronger if it included different types of thinking, Lisa said. The Craxi understanding of honor, Vorthak logic, Etherian wisdom, Quillan innovation. Imagine what problems you could solve with that kind of diversity, Jake. Move to the Vorthak delegation next. Commander Alex Chen took the lead here. High Technician, the Vorthak worship logic and calculation. You believe that all problems can be solved through proper analysis. But tell me, what's the logical outcome of this war? The Vorthak's mechanical voice was flat, as always. Current. Projections indicate mutual extinction within 173 standard years. And yet you continue fighting. Why? Because cessation of hostilities without victory conditions met results in strategic disadvantage, Alex smiled. But what if I told you there was something your computers can't calculate? Something that defies mathematical probability but happens anyway. He brought up records of human achievements that should have been impossible. This is the Apollo project. Humans decided to travel to their moon using technology that had a calculated failure rate of 37%. Logic said it was impossible. They did it anyway. This is the story of Marie Curie, who discovered radioactivity, despite her research having a 92% probability of failure according to the science of her time. This is the tale of the Wright brothers, whose flying machine had been mathematically proven impossible by the greatest engineers of their era. The High Technician processed this information. These outcomes were statistically improbable. Exactly, Alex said. Human logic includes something your computers might not understand. Hope. The willingness to try something that might fail because the reward for success is worth the risk of failure. Your calculations show this war ending in extinction. But they can't calculate what happens if you choose to hope for peace instead. Alex pulled up more data. Logic serves life, not the other way around. The most logical thing you can do is find a way to survive and thrive. That requires ending this war, even if the mathematical certainty isn't there. For the first time since Jake had known him, the High Technician seemed to consider information that didn't fit into standard calculations. Jake approached the Etherian elder. Maria Santos stepped forward, her expertise in alien spirituality crucial here. Elder, the Etherians see the future through cosmic visions. You believe in destiny and fate. But what if I told you that the greatest spiritual wisdom comes from creating your own meaning instead of waiting for the universe to provide it? Elder's energy form shimmered. The cosmic order determines all outcomes. Maria showed images of human spiritual practices from around Earth. These are human temples, churches, meditation centers, and sacred spaces. Each one represents a different way of finding meaning in existence. Some humans believe in fate, others in free will. Some worship gods, others worship nature. Still others worship the power of consciousness itself. She paused, letting the images sink in. But they all have one thing in common. They teach that the most sacred act is to choose hope over despair, love over hatred, creation over destruction. Even when the future is uncertain, especially when it's uncertain. Your visions show possible futures, Elder, but they also show that the future depends on the choices made in the present. The most spiritual thing you can do is choose to create a better tomorrow, even if you can't see exactly what it looks like. The Elder's form became more solid, as if anchoring itself to the present moment. Finally, Jake addressed the trade prince. And the Quillins value prosperity, the growth of wealth and opportunity. But what prosperity can there be in a galaxy? At war? The trade prince's golden fur bristled. War may be expensive, but peace with enemies is dangerous to business. Jake laughed, surprising everyone. Dangerous? Let me tell you about dangerous business practices. He showed records of Earth's economic development. This is the Marshall Plan. After Earth's most devastating war, the winning nations gave money and resources to help rebuild their former enemies. Economists called it financial suicide. What happened? The trade prince asked, despite himself. The former enemies became the best trading partners and customers. The money invested in rebuilding them returned 10 times over in new business opportunities. Peace wasn't just morally right, it was incredibly profitable. Jake showed more examples. Free trade agreements, economic cooperation zones, shared development projects. Every time humans chose partnership over domination, wealth grew for everyone involved. The richest human nations are the ones with the most diverse trading partners. The trade prince's forearms moved in complex patterns as he calculated. Partnership, instead of conquest, the economic possibilities. Jake returned to the center of the circle. Each of your species values something beautiful and important. Honor, unity, logic, wisdom, prosperity. But this war is destroying all of those things. It's turning honor into cruelty, unity into isolation, logic into madness, wisdom into fear, and prosperity into poverty. He looked around the circle at faces that showed the first signs of hope in 3 centuries. What if, instead of trying to defeat each other, you worked together? What if Craxi honor protected everyone, not just Craxi? What if Zelthari unity included all species? What if Vorthak logic solved galactic problems? What if Etherian wisdom guided everyone's spiritual? Jake woke to the sound of alarms screaming through the crystal halls of Nexus Prime. Red emergency lights flashed through his quarters, and the urgent voice of the planetary defense system echoed from hidden speakers. He grabbed his communicator and ran into the hallway where he found Lisa, Alex, and Maria already gathering. What's happening? He called out over the noise. Alex was monitoring his portable tactical display, his face grim. Long-range sensors are picking up weapons fire in the Theta sector. It looks like a major engagement between Craxi and Zelthari forces. Jake's heart sank. After 3 days of progress, after seeing the first signs of hope in alien faces that had known only hatred, someone had started shooting again. How bad? Bad, Alex replied, his fingers dancing over the display controls. Initial reports suggest a surprise attack on a Zelthari research station, casualties in the thousands. The 4 humans ran through the crystal corridors toward the main assembly hall, where chaos had already erupted. Alien delegates were shouting at each other in a dozen different languages. Security forces were taking defensive positions, and the careful seating arrangements Jake had worked to establish were falling apart, as each faction retreated to their own areas. General Vextar stood in the center of the Craxi section, surrounded by his warriors. His scarred face was twisted with rage, but Jake could see something else underneath the anger. Shame. The general's hands were shaking, and his yellow eyes kept darting away from the other delegates. The queen voice of the Zelthari was surrounded by a dozen other collective representatives, their combined light pulsing with grief and fury. 3,000 minds, she said, her voice carrying the weight of shared loss. 3,000 unique perspectives torn from the collective by craxy savagery. How can we negotiate with murderers? The attack was not authorized by this delegation. Vextar growled, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. Extremist elements within the military acted without orders. Your extremist elements, the Queen voice shot back. Your warriors, following your cultural teachings of honor through violence. The other factions quickly chose sides. The Vorthak High Technician announced that statistical analysis indicated continued warfare was now inevitable. The Etherean Elder's form flickered with cosmic distress as visions of darkness clouded their perception. The trade prince began calculating the profit potential of resumed arms sales, though his golden fur betrayed his nervousness. Jake watched his carefully built progress crumble in real time. Everything they had accomplished, every small step toward understanding, was being washed away in a tide of renewed hatred. This was exactly what he had feared most. We're withdrawing from negotiations, the Queen voice declared. The collective will not sit at the same table as beings who murder our minds while speaking of peace. Wait, Jake called out, but his voice was lost in the noise of alien languages, all speaking at once, all saying variations of the same thing. The war would continue. The killing would resume. 3 centuries of conflict would stretch into 4, then 5, until there was nothing left but dead worlds and bitter memories. Jake felt the weight of failure crushing down on him. Earth's first major diplomatic mission would end in disaster. Worse, humanity might find itself dragged into a galactic war they could never survive. He had gambled everything on the hope that these ancient enemies could find common ground, and he had lost. But then he remembered something his brother had told him, years ago during Earth's own conflicts. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to give up, even when giving up makes perfect sense. Jake climbed onto one of the crystal platforms that had been used for formal presentations. I want to hold a memorial service, he announced. The hall gradually quieted as his words were translated into various alien languages. Confused faces turned toward him. A memorial service, Jake repeated, for the 3,000 Zelthari minds that died today. I want all of you to attend, General Vextar snarled. The Craxi do not mourn enemy dead. I'm not asking you to mourn enemies, Jake said quietly. I'm asking you to mourn people, individuals who had dreams, hopes, and fears, just like you do. The Queen voice's light flickered with uncertainty. You would honor our fallen? Dr. Harper has been studying Zelthari culture for the past 3 days, Jake said. She's learned about some of the minds that were lost. I think you should hear about them. Lisa stepped forward, her tablet filled with information she had gathered during their diplomatic preparation. She had studied not just military records and political structures, but personal stories, individual histories, the small details that made each alien species more than just statistics. Velthara of the Crystal Gardens, Lisa began, reading from her notes. She was a collective mind who dreamed of creating new forms of mathematical art. She had spent 60 years developing equations that could grow into beautiful crystalline structures. Her work was close to breakthrough when the attack came. The Queen voice's light dimmed. You know of Velthara's work? Zonkith the Wanderer, Lisa continued. He joined the collective late in life, after traveling alone through space for decades. He brought knowledge of 17 different star systems and was working on a project to map safe trade routes for all species. He believed that if everyone could travel safely, there would be less reason for conflict. More collective minds began to gather around Lisa, their lights pulsing with something that might have been surprise. Humans had taken the time to learn about individual Zelthari, something that rarely happened even among other collective species. Nix Ara, the bridge builder, Lisa read. She specialized in translating collective thoughts into individual understanding. She was working on a communication system that would let the Zelthari collective talk directly with single-minded species, without losing meaning in translation. Jake watched the faces around the hall. The other alien delegates were listening now, their expressions showing confusion and discomfort. It was easy to hate enemies. It was much harder to hate people with names, dreams, and families. 1,200 other minds, Lisa continued. Teachers, artists, explorers, scientists, parents, children, dreamers. Each one unique, irreplaceable. Each one working on projects that could have benefited not just the Zelthari collective, but the entire galaxy. She closed her tablet and looked directly at General Vextar. These weren't soldiers, General. They weren't warriors fighting for conquest or glory. They were civilians working to make the galaxy a better place. And now, they're gone forever. The hall was completely silent. Jake had never heard such absolute quiet among so many beings. Even the electronic humming of Vorthak computers had stopped. General Vexitar stood slowly. His massive form seemed smaller somehow, as if the weight of what he was hearing was physically crushing him down. "Their name," he said, his voice barely audible. "You learned their names." "Every single one," Lisa confirmed. The general's scarred hands began to shake more violently. "In 3 centuries of war, I have killed thousands, tens of thousands. I never learned their names." "That's what war does," Jake said gently. "It turns people into enemies, enemies into targets, targets into statistics. It makes it easier to kill when you don't think about who you're killing." Vexitar's yellow eyes, filled with something Jake had never expected to see in a Craxi warrior. Tears. "I remember, in the early battles, before the hatred grew so deep, I remember taking prisoners. I remember one Zelthari mind who told me about his research into healing crystals. I thought it was beautiful work." The general's massive frame shuddered. "What have we become? What have I become?" The queen voice moved closer, her light reaching out tentatively toward the crying warrior. "You have become what war makes of everyone, General. It makes us forget that our enemies are people, too." Jake looked around the hall at faces showing emotions he had never seen from these species before. Regret, shame, grief, but also something else. Recognition. For the first time in 3 centuries, they were seeing their enemies as fellow beings, rather than obstacles to be destroyed. The Vorthak high technician spoke, his mechanical voice carrying unusual emotion. "Statistical analysis of individual life value versus military objectives indicates that we have been calculating incorrectly for 300 years. The Etherian Elder's form solidified more than Jake had ever seen it. The visions show paths of darkness because we have been walking in darkness. But light is possible. Light is always possible, if we choose to see it." The trade prince approached the group, his forearms moving in what Jake recognized as a gesture of respect among his people. The real cost isn't just in credits and resources, it's in all the things that will never be created, never be discovered, never be shared because we destroyed the minds that could have created them. Jake felt something shift in the air around them. The memorial for 3,000 dead minds had become something else. It had become a moment of awakening, a recognition that the war had stolen more than just lives. It had stolen possibilities, futures, dreams that could have benefited everyone. "The question now," Jake said quietly, "is what we do next. We can let grief and anger drive us back to war, or we can let the memory of these lost minds inspire us to build something better." The 6th day of the summit dawned with a different energy in the crystal halls. The memorial service had changed something fundamental in the atmosphere. Where there had been suspicion and hatred, now there was something Jake had never expected to see among these ancient enemies. There was grief, yes, but also a shared understanding of loss that transcended species boundaries. Jake stood before the assembled delegates, knowing that everything he said in the next few minutes would determine not just the success of the peace negotiations, but potentially the survival of his own species. If he failed now, humanity would be seen as incompetent mediators who had made the Galactic War worse instead of better. But Jake had one more card to play, the most dangerous, most vulnerable card in the human diplomatic deck. The truth. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's crystal acoustics. "Something my government ordered me never to reveal under any circumstances." The alien delegates leaned forward. sensing that whatever came next would be important. Even the electronic humming of Vorthak computers seemed to quiet in anticipation. "Earth is terrified of all of you," Jake said simply. The statement hit the room like a physical force. General Vexitar's scarred face showed confusion. The Queen Voice's light flickered with surprise. The other delegates exchanged glances that suggested they had never considered this possibility. "Terrified?" the High Technician asked, his mechanical voice processing this unexpected data. Jake nodded. "Completely, absolutely terrified. Any one of your civilizations could destroy humanity without significant effort. The Kraxi military could conquer Earth in a matter of days. The Zelthari collective could overwhelm all human minds simultaneously. The Vorthak technology could shut down every system on our planet. The Etherian energy powers could unravel our entire solar system. The Quillan economic influence could bankrupt our civilization without firing a single shot." He paused, letting this information sink in. "When you invited us to mediate this summit, Earth's leadership nearly rejected the offer. Not because we didn't want to help, but because we were afraid that getting involved in your war would make us targets." General Vextar's yellow eyes narrowed. "Then why did you come?" "Because," Jake said, "we realized that our fear was exactly why we had to come. Earth's military strength means nothing here. Our technology can't compete with yours. Our economic power is insignificant compared to galactic standards. We have only one thing to offer that might be valuable. Our perspective as the weakest species in the room." The Queen Voice's light pulsed with something that might have been curiosity. "How does weakness provide valuable perspective?" Dr. Lisa Harper stepped forward. "Because when you're weak, you can't afford to make enemies. You have to find other ways to solve problems. Earth's entire diplomatic philosophy is built on the understanding that we need friends to survive." She activated a holographic display, showing Earth's historical development. "These are records of human conflict resolution over the past century. Every single successful negotiation was achieved, not through strength but through understanding. We learned to listen to our enemies, to find out what they really wanted, to discover the fears hiding behind their anger." Commander Alex Chen joined the presentation. "Strategic analysis shows that the strongest military position is actually the most dangerous one. When you're the most powerful, you start to believe that force can solve every problem. But force only creates temporary victories. Understanding creates lasting solutions." Maria Santos added her own perspective. "Linguistically speaking, the word victory in most galactic languages has evolved to mean the defeat of others. But in human languages, victory can also mean the achievement of something beneficial for everyone. We win when everyone wins." Jake looked around the hall at faces that were showing a mixture of confusion, surprise, and something that might have been respect. "We didn't come here because we were powerful enough to force you to make peace. We came here because we were weak enough to understand why peace was necessary." The trade prince leaned forward, his golden fur shimmering with interest. "You're saying that your weakness is actually your strength?" "Not our weakness," Jake corrected. "Our recognition of our weakness. When you know you can't win through force, you have to find other ways. You have to be creative, compassionate, understanding. You have to see your opponents not as enemies to be destroyed, but as problems to be solved." General Vextar stood slowly, his massive frame towering over the seated delegates. "You are saying that we have been strong enough to destroy each other, but not wise enough to save ourselves. I'm saying that true strength isn't the ability to destroy others," Jake replied. "It's the ability to help others become their best selves. Earth learned this lesson through centuries of our own wars. We almost destroyed ourselves several times. The only reason we survived was that we learned to channel our strength into building rather than destroying." The Etherian Elder's energy form began to solidify more completely than Jake had ever seen. The visions. "I see new possibilities forming. Paths of light where there was only darkness before." "Because you're not looking at each other as enemies anymore," Jake said. "You're looking at each other as fellow beings with problems to solve and dreams to achieve." The Queen Voice spoke, her light reaching out toward the other delegates. The collective has been focused on protecting itself from external threats. But what if the collective could include external perspectives? Not absorption, but cooperation? The high technicians' computers hummed with new calculations. Cooperative problem-solving with diverse cognitive approaches would exponentially increase solution efficiency. The mathematical possibilities are extraordinary. Jake felt the momentum building. What if, instead of fighting over territory, you worked together to explore new worlds? What if, instead of competing for resources, you shared technology to create abundance? What if, instead of trying to defeat each other, you helped each other achieve your greatest dreams? The trade prince's forearms moved in complex patterns of excitement. Joint economic development projects, shared research initiatives, cultural exchange programs, the profit potential is staggering. Not just profit, General Vextar said, his voice growing stronger with each word. Honor, true honor, in protecting and serving others regardless of their species. The collective grows stronger with diversity of thought, the Queen voice added. Perhaps it is time for the diversity to include non-collective minds. Wisdom shared is wisdom multiplied, the Etherean elder observed, their form now completely solid and radiating peaceful energy. Jake looked around the hall and realized that something miraculous was happening. These beings who had been enemies for 3 centuries were beginning to imagine themselves as allies. Not just allies of convenience, but genuine partners working toward common goals. There's one more thing, Jake said. Earth would like to propose the creation of a Galactic Mediation Corps, an organization dedicated to resolving conflicts before they become wars. Humans would be honored to help train mediators from all species, teaching the techniques we've developed for understanding different perspectives and finding common ground. The delegates looked at each other with expressions Jake had never seen before. Not suspicion or calculation, but genuine consideration of possibilities they had never imagined. 6 months later, Jake stood on the bridge of the UES Harmony, reading reports from across the galaxy. The Craxi military was now protecting joint colonies established by multiple species. Zelthari collective intelligence was being used to solve galactic challenges like resource distribution and climate management on war-damaged worlds. Vorthak technology was connecting distant civilizations through new communication networks. Etherean wisdom was guiding ethical development of technologies that had previously been used only for warfare. Quillan trade routes were ensuring that prosperity reached every inhabited system. The 3-century war hadn't ended with surrender or conquest. It had ended with something much more powerful, the revolutionary understanding that former enemies could become family. General Vextar's latest message had been particularly moving. The former warlord was now leading a combined military force that protected trade routes and rescued refugees, finding greater honor in saving lives than he had ever found in taking them. The human Morrison taught us that the strongest warrior is the one who fights for everyone, not just their own people, he had written. The Queen voice had evolved the collective to include individual perspectives from multiple species, creating a form of consciousness that had never existed before. The Vorthak had developed new calculation methods that included illogical factors like hope and compassion. The Etherians had discovered that the future was more beautiful when it was created cooperatively, rather than predetermined by cosmic fate. The Quillans had found that the most profitable business was helping others achieve their dreams. Jake looked out at the stars, no longer dead monuments to war, but bright promises of exploration and cooperation. Humanity had won their place at the galactic table, not through superior technology or military might, but through something far more valuable: the wisdom to see